So you might have noticed I'm not a huge fan of Velma.
Oh my god!
I did have fun speculating on who the culprit could be. Unfortunately, they managed to flub that too, with a poorly handled twist villain, because we don't get enough of those from Disney. What potential the show did have was squandered. It kind of felt like the mystery was an afterthought in a franchise that's all about solving mysteries. Not that this show seemed too concerned with the source material. They tried to call it a playful reimagining, but it seems a lot more mean-spirited than that, which is a real shame. The mystery begins 2 years before the series starts. It's Christmas Eve and Velma's mother runs out to get a present for her after she snooped and found all of her other presents, but she never comes back. The police discover her car, with nothing inside except for a present that's wrapped for Velma, and her glasses. Velma tries to investigate what happened, but she ends up having terrible hallucinations, ones that cause her so much stress her heart can give out, so she's forced to give up mystery solving. 2 years pass and she's 15 now, but nothing's really progressed. Her mom's disappearance became a cold case and the police are no longer investigating it. One day Velma opens her locker to discover the dead body of one of her classmates, where the brain has been surgically removed. Velma's initially accused of the murder, since she has a history of violence and straight up threatening to kill people, which she does in front of the cops. They actually let her go, and tell her she has 24 hours to prove her innocence, otherwise she'll be arrested, which isn't how that works, but whatever. So she's forced back into mystery solving. What follows ends up being a mess. She's able to avoid going to jail by accusing Fred of the murder, and even though Fred is eventually proven innocent, which would probably imply that she's now a suspect again, they kinda just drop this. They never investigate her afterwards or anything. So instead she moves on to trying to find her mom. She gets her mother's cold case from Daphne, where it's revealed that her last known location was at Fred's house on Christmas Eve. So Fred does some research and discovers that his house was originally owned by a scientist called Dr. Edna Purdue, who was known for human experimentation, and it turns out she was Norval's grandmother. Velma ends up catching Mr. and Mrs. Rogers in a compromising position, so she blackmails Mrs. Rogers to get her to tell her everything about her mom. She reveals that her mother was experimenting on humans, where she was able to remove someone's brain and have it survive outside of their bodies. So the government recruited her to help them with their Project Scooby, a covert operation where they would remove the brains of young people and replace them with soldiers' brains, so they could better indoctrinate the youth. Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. They originally tried hypnosis to brainwash the teens, however it was easy to break out of. All they had to do was snap their fingers, which was too common an occurrence for them to continue with that plan. According to the official story, Project Scooby failed, and Purdue eventually went mad, so she had herself institutionalized and hid her journal so no one could recreate the project, but her lab is still in the basement of Fred's house. Velma speculates there could be a connection between this and what's going on now, both with the disappearance of her mother and what's happening to her classmates. 2 other bodies were discovered killed in the same way, with their brains removed. According to Fred, they originally intended to burn the house down for the insurance money when they bought it, but for some reason Fred's father didn't show up on Christmas Eve, so they ultimately ended up living in the house instead, making his father's absence that night very suspicious. It was also Christmas Eve, so I'm not sure why he wasn't there to begin with. He also confirms that he saw Dia that night, but he didn't know what she was doing there. So Velma, Fred, and Velma's dad Amon all go into the basement, where they discover the lab and evidence that Dia was there. Other clues surface throughout the season, and everything culminates in the final episode, where the killer is finally revealed. However, it ends up being Fred's mother Victoria, a twist that I would argue doesn't add up, and not just because some information was saved for the big reveal, it just doesn't make sense, and it straight up contradicts things that we got before. For example, during Fogfest they get chased around by the killer, and in the end she ends up capturing Fred, and holding him underground in a bunker for 2 days, along with the brains of the other victims. And they ask why she would kidnap her own son this way, and she claims her plan all along was to replace his brain with that of a popular girl, because she believes that Fred is too incompetent to manage a business, and eventually he's going to take over the family business of Jones Gentleman's Accessories, but she's worried he'll end up running it into the ground. So instead of just teaching him to be a good businessman, especially considering the fact that he's just a teenager, so they have plenty of time to teach him stuff, she decides to cut out his brain and replace it with somebody who reminds her of herself, because she's a narcissist, and something about the glass ceiling. Regardless of why though, her kidnapping him at Fogfest makes no sense. First of all, she ends up reporting him missing. Why would she do that if she's the one who kidnapped him to begin with? It leads to a huge search and rescue mission, and Fred's disappearance is prioritized priority number one, even putting him before other people who need rescue, including Velma and her friends, who due to shenanigans end up being trapped in a ravine. So Fred is a high-profile case, and you'd think since she has this crazy plan she would want as few eyes on the situation as possible. So why order a manhunt for the son that she kidnapped? I don't even know why she kidnapped him at Fogfest. They lived together, she could have just quietly taken him in the night. Instead she decided to make a huge scene. How did she pull this off anyway? She was at Fogfest all night with her husband, and they're very high profile, since they're the ones who financed Fogfest to begin with. But at some point she snuck off to get changed, chased a bunch of kids around, and then kidnapped her own son, dragging him to an underground bunker outside of town, only to then come back to Fogfest to report him missing. How is that possible? This plan is completely unnecessary in the first place. First of all, there's no evidence that Victoria has the knowledge to medically remove someone's brain. Dr. Purdue was a neurosurgeon, so that adds up, but it turns out that Victoria is the daughter of General Meeting, the guy who recruited Dr. Purdue to begin with, and I think that part works fine. If she wanted to come back and finish Project Scooby, that would have worked, but instead she's worried about the family business. It seems like she's putting Fred's incompetence on his gender and assumes that a woman would do a better job. So she kidnaps random girls just because they're pretty and remind her of herself, but then only realizes after the procedure that they also wouldn't be good fits to be CEO. It's almost like these are kids who don't actually care about business because they're kids, obviously. If she had just been a good mom and been responsible for her son to teach him the lessons that she wants him to know, all of this could be avoided. And the kicker is this whole brain plot is completely unnecessary anyway. Her father was a master hypnotist and it turns out she is too. She can hypnotize anybody into doing anything she wants. So wouldn't the obvious option be to just hypnotize him to be the perfect CEO? Then she wouldn't have to put in any effort to either raise him properly or cut out people's brains. It would also explain why she would raise the alarm if he went missing, because she needs him to be the future CEO and not actually because he's her son that she loves, which is unfortunate, but I guess she's a villain. She does hypnotize her husband William because he figured out what she was up to and apparently wasn't involved at all, which makes no sense because the clues were pointing to him. I can understand a red herring, but this is ridiculous. Where was he on Christmas Eve 2 years ago? And if Victoria wanted this specific house due to the lab in the basement, where did this plot to burn it down for insurance money come from? Why does William have secret passages in the walls of the house that he can use to spy on his family members? None of this is addressed. I guess he's just a creep? The setup just isn't there for this to work. With mysteries, watching it the first time lets you see how everything unfolds, but then on rewatch you can pick up all these details and clues that you missed the first time you watched it. But that's not the case with this show. It's just fundamentally flawed. Some of the clues even end up being inconsistent. Like Daphne's biological mother, Carol, ends up finding what appears to be a necklace in the crystal mines. She sends it to Daphne, who then gives it to Velma, except now it's a completely different piece. All of a sudden it's a pocket watch, despite the fact that it was never portrayed as one before. And the chain is completely different too. This seems to be a completely different item altogether, instead of what Carol found before. Why hide what it is from us? It's an essential clue too, because it's the pocket watch that Victoria uses to hypnotize people. So they randomly change the clues on us, have William do shady things for no discernible reason, and while Victoria was more of a minor character, what we do get with her contradicts her being the villain. Plus hypnotism could easily solve all of Victoria's problems. It feels like they just chose her at random to be the villain, instead of having the story naturally lead to that conclusion. And none of her actions make any sense in this plot. So Dia likes mysteries, and she notices that this house that just sold originally belonged to a mad scientist, so she wants to investigate it before the new family moves in. But there she runs into Victoria, who ends up hypnotizing her so she can rebuild the lab, and kidnaps her for 2 years. But was that really necessary? Why not just ask her to collaborate on this project, since both of them are interested in Dr. Purdue's work? No hypnotism required. I'm sure Dia would have accepted. Victoria manipulated other people like Daphne. Instead, she causes a missing persons case which could lead her to being caught. She tries to prevent this by hypnotizing a young Velma after she was looking for her missing mother, causing her to have terrible hallucinations whenever she tries to solve a mystery. Apparently no one ever snapped their fingers around Velma for the last 2 years, which would have broken the hypnotism. Speaking of which, she probably should have done that when William showed up hypnotized. Instead they make Fred fight his dad. Velma could have snapped her fingers or at least told Fred that that would work. Hasn't this kid suffered enough? So 2 years pass and Dia's case goes cold, mostly because the police department are incompetent, and Velma's basically been forced to give up on the case or else she might die. But then Victoria goes out of her way to frame Velma, and I'm not sure why. They say that she wanted Velma out of her way, but she already was? It had been 2 years and she wasn't looking into the case anymore, and that wasn't going to change. Ironically, framing Velma like this forces her back into the case, so she's basically just setting up her own demise. Also, to set up Velma, Victoria would have had to kidnap Brenda, cut out her brain in the bunker, drag Brenda's body all the way to the school, break into the school, find Velma's locker, get the combination to Velma's locker, and then shove the body in the locker to be discovered later, and then get out without being noticed. Yeah, that adds up. It's the perfect crime. Seriously, just hypnotize Fred to be the perfect son. This is ridiculous. It does feel like the mystery aspect of this show was more of an afterthought, which is very disappointing considering the fact that this is supposed to be a Scooby Doo spinoff. Victoria tries to cover for herself in front of Fred by claiming she's possessed by the ghost of Dr. Perdue, which would have worked a lot better. Dr. Perdue coming back to get revenge on General Meeting by taking it out on his daughter and destroying her family, or maybe the government wanted to bring back Project Scooby. That could make Victoria's involvement make sense. Also, Gigi's father's in the military, so that could have given her more to do in the story than just be Norval's girlfriend. It would have been kind of cool if all of the parents were involved in some way. To be honest, there are a million ways you could have made this work, and it would have been nice if they'd actually put some effort into the story. A lot of shows got cancelled, but this one is the one that made it, and that's a shame. But that's my opinion. What do you guys think? Who do you think should have been the bad guy? Or do you think Victoria's story was fine? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, everybody. I really appreciate it. Before I go, I want to give a shout out to our members: Stutania, Tyrant Carnivore, Adam K, The Rabbit Mancer, General Bolivar, Depth Charge Media, Samaru163, Gabby Hime, Verdant Range, JVR, Hussyman42, Nixel, Eric Griffin, Phil C, Taylor Ramirez, Caleb Nelson, Bandito Bane, Dakari the Professor, Equestron, Norman Sweetcream, Way Beyond Coincidence, Garcia XV Legend, Hunter Rose, Dash Hound, 80s Nostalgia Guy, Miranda Sinistra, Butcher7 Actual, Kitsune Fiora, Felix Spam, Soundboy00, Owen Wildish, Lil, and Player Zero. Thank you all so much for your support, and if you'd like to support the channel as a member, you can hit the join button next to the subscribe button. And if you enjoyed this content, you can like the video and subscribe to the channel, and that part's free. We also have Buy Me Coffee if you want to support us that way. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.